Good morning. Today on this very special 12 noon edition of Spotlight, a look at the impact of the COVID-19 outbreak from a religious perspective in the midst of a very holy season. How is this pandemic changing the way we practice our various faiths? We'll put that question to professors of religion Sean Stead and Michael Pitlick of Wayne State University and Oakland University, respectively. And later in this program, Chris Marshall, leader of Mentoring Futures, and Doug North, chairman of the canceled 2020 North American International Auto Show, will also be our guest. It's Sunday, April the 12th. I'm Chuck Stokes, and this is Spotlight. Professors, thank you for joining me today on Spotlight. Hope that both of you are well.
We're doing good.
Great. Indulge me for a moment here, because we're in this religious period, to do sort of an intellectual exercise with two religious experts. I'm going to read you a recent statement that Bill Gates, the entrepreneur, said. And this is the statement. He said, in relation to COVID-19, I am a strong believer that there is a spiritual purpose behind everything that happens, whether it is what we perceive as being good or being bad. Now, that's the end of his quote. But I can tell you, if I had $1 million for every time I heard the phrase, everything happens for a reason, I probably wouldn't be doing this interview, because I would be in a villa somewhere in the Seychelles Islands. But I don't have the money, so we're going to play with this exercise. Tell me, from a religious and perhaps philosophical point of view, what is the reason for this virus that is sweeping this globe? Professor Pitlick, we'll start with you.
Wow, thank you. That's huge. I'm mostly representing the Jewish tradition, and we have a lot of stories in the Hebrew Bible that deal with such issues, such as why bad things happen to good people. The book of Job comes to mind. All of the biblical characters are either flawed in some way or have to rise above many challenges, as we all do. I've been thinking about the Jewish tradition anyway. I'm not sure that there is necessarily an acceptance of trouble, like there is a reason necessarily. It depends on time and place and which groups you're speaking to, but I think what is more important is the responses to suffering, the responses to troubles in these situations. And I think the tradition, at least the Jewish tradition and others that I'm aware of, do have a response to that. It's how we act in these situations.
Professor Stead, your take on this, because certainly there are a lot of people shaking their heads right now as they are losing loved ones or watching them fight this battle in a hospital or in quarantine, saying, why?
Yeah. Well, yeah, suffering is part of human life. And I mean, in the world's different religious traditions, there's all of them have ways of dealing with suffering, different kinds of medicine that they offer us for dealing with it. And so, I mean, it is a big tragedy for people. People are dying, and our communities are being separated by this. But I think a lot of people, too, derive a certain amount of hope from the religious background and think, okay, maybe, God sends these trials as a way to help us deepen our relationship with the people around us in certain ways.
Bill Gates suggested that is good coming out of this situation is that, one, it's making us focus on the fact that we have been too materialistic in our society, and that this virus is taking prisoners across the realm, whether you're rich, whether you're poor, regardless of what your race is and your age and your ethnicity, that it is wreaking havoc everywhere. And that maybe it's making all of us come back and say, what are the real priorities, or what should be the real priorities in our life?
I think we have...
Go ahead, either one of you.
Yeah, go ahead, Professor Pitlick.
Thank you. I think we have two really good examples we're in the midst of right now, and that is the Passover holiday, festival of Passover, and then Easter coming up. Just a thought here about the Passover Seder that is going on currently for Jews around the world. And that is, the story in the Bible is one of affliction, of hardship, of escaping that. So we have a very central symbol in the Passover Seder, the Passover meal and learning, and that is the bread of affliction, the matzah that is the represent there. Mm-hmm. And this is called the bread of affliction in the story. And the thing that's in front of us now is that we are all afflicted. And so we are all, in a sense, in bondage in some ways. And I think what's really been interesting for a lot of the people I've been speaking to is the things we have taken for granted are right now in front of us. And we see the stories in a different way, perhaps, and we can see now also what happens with the biblical stories or those leaders that motivate us, Jesus, for example, Moses and others, that we remember what it was like not only for them, but what it's like for us. And what are we going to do about that? How are we going to reach out and turn that bread of affliction into the bread of freedom, which is also part of the Passover story?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Professor Stidd, your take, because certainly if you look at the celebration of Easter, it is because Jesus rose from the dead 3 days into all this, but he suffered. He suffered a lot.
That's right. Well, and I think that for Orthodox and Catholic Christians and some Protestants too right now, it's the season of Lent, right, which is a season of fasting in preparation for Easter, as you say. And I think in some ways, I think for some of those people, I've heard priests and pastors talk about how maybe the fasting we do, in a weird way, the disease kind of feeds into it a little bit, because like you quoted Bill Gates about the materialism, right? Maybe trying to leave that materialism behind a little bit, maybe try to remember, like, what is it that calls us, to think of God maybe in times like this, then, the plague's not good, certainly, but maybe it helps us remember these things and so maybe prepare more for this, upcoming season of, as you say, the resurrection and so forth. Professor Pitlick, I also, when you mentioned Passover, it's hard for me not to think of the plagues that, were sent upon Egypt at a certain time. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that in relation to this, but
what's interesting in this. What's interesting in the stories, we read
Let me interrupt for just a second. I need to get to a break. When we come back, we're going to pick up with Professor Pitlick answering the question that Professor Stidd put to him. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Professor Pitlick, I'll give you a chance to answer that question.
The question that was brought up about suffering, about the plagues that were put on Egypt, it's interesting to note that how that's described in the text. And yes, it is there. It does not seem fair. But at the same time, the message for that is that we do not rejoice in other sufferings, including the Egyptians. So it was technically in the biblical tradition anyway, in the biblical story of the Exodus, it is not a holiday where we celebrate that fact. It is meant to be somewhat somber in a sense. Yes, it ends up being a positive story about religious freedom and personal freedom and getting out of bondage in a number of ways, but also remembering not taking joy in any way in other people's suffering. I think that's a very important message that sometimes gets a little bit lost.
In addition to the point about materialism and technology, one thing that this plague has really showed us is how important community is. And to bring it back to the religious element, I think when I talk to friends who are priests or pastors or whatever, one thing they say, that's what's missing. Of course, we can all pray on our own. If we're praying people, we can read our books on our own if we're the kind of people who do that. Mm-hmm. But I think for most people, religious life involves coming together, be it Muslims or Sikhs or Hindus, Christians, Jews, whoever it is. We come together in groups to kind of give honor in whatever way our tradition tells us to do that. And I think it's very hard for a lot of people that they can't do that right now. And that goes for school and church, yeah.
Yeah, I think it is indeed a challenge. Professor Pitlick, in addition to your teaching at Oakland University, you also traditionally have taken it outside the classroom, and you even lead excursions to Israel and other places to some of the great artifacts. How's that impacted this? Because you had some trips lined up, right?
We have a wonderful program in the summer where we take students to an archaeological excavation, and there's a field school and a tour of Israel. And every year for the last 12, we've gone consistently. And this year it was all study abroad programs were canceled, unfortunately. And this really affects students in a number of ways. It's not just a great trip. We have absolutely wonderful support for this. We fund a great deal of the student cost for this. It's really a premier program. But these students really need credits for to finish a degree or to get ready for graduate school. So it's affecting students in a myriad of ways. It's just not the disappointment of not going on trips. Looks like I have two other personal trips to Europe that are falling by the wayside as well. One thing that comes across is that we've never been more alone in this situation, but at the same time, we've also never been more connected. So I really want to make that point, and that is there are so many resources out there that people should be aware of. There's daily meditation classes, yoga is free online. There are prayer groups, there's virtual Seders, virtual Easter.
That you can do a lot of things.
Lots of churches are broadcasting services too.
Oh, no question about it. Final question to both of you. We have just a teeny bit of time left, so you have to kind of answer it in an abbreviated fashion. No dissertations here, so to speak. So many churches, mosques, what have you, been affected. Right now, it's Passover and it's Easter. For our Muslim friends, we're coming up on Ramadan. That's going to probably be affected as well. This stuff is going to be going on for quite a while in terms of staying at home. If you had a message to these various religious leaders who are now being forced to think out the box in terms of how to get their messages across and keep their flocks together and to keep, let's be honest, to keep the money coming in that supports these organizations, what would your message be to them?
The leader of a religious organization is a person who's, trying to help people deepen their relationship with God or with their own spirituality. And so, I think the people, the pastors, priests, rabbis, sheikhs, whoever it is who are looking after their people, they're going to come back together after this maybe stronger. So, I mean, that's what I would say personally.
Okay.
There are great resources out there for virtual, live lectures, group meditations, virtual services, these types of things. There are so many great things that I've discovered myself, even outside the Jewish tradition. T.J. Jakes is speaking wonderfully. Rabbi Sachs from the UK is speaking. There's online meditation classes every day at 12 o'clock that provide some structure and also provide hope. And I think one thing is all these religious traditions have told us to really start to think about the internal life that we have. Let's not waste this opportunity because we will get back to our running around every day like we always do. Yeah. And I think what we should come out of this with some goals. It's not just New Year's resolution time. This is serious. This is where we can really start to think about community and so on.
Yeah.
All right. Professors, thank you so much for spending some time with us today on Spotlight. Good health to both of you.
Thank you.
And we will stay in touch.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
And coming up, we'll talk to Chris Marshall of Winning Futures, and she'll take it in a different direction. She'll talk about all of those young people and their parents who are home trying to figure out how to navigate this virus. We'll be right back. Chris, there are thousands of students, young people at home with their parents by force, not by choice, trying to figure out how to navigate their way through all of this online and distance learning and trying to keep the kids occupied while the parents are trying to do their jobs from home. What kind of advice would you be able to give them based upon your experience and what you've done?
Well, first and foremost, it's making sure that, everybody's feeling okay and that the kids have an understanding of what's going on and that they feel comfortable to talk to their parents about what they're feeling right now. So that's really number one. And number two is to make sure that they still have structure. Structure is so very important with students. Right now, they should have been, getting up and going to school, and whether they were having breakfast at school or headed to first hour, having that consistency with structure is really important. And so in our Winning Futures classroom, we continue that type of structure. Even though our kids are no longer in school, they're still doing outreach with their mentors and with our staff. So as a parent, I know for me, I have a 13-year-old son, and we make sure that he is getting certain things done each day. And that's one of the reasons we've created some of these at-home activities that parents can do with their students from our curriculum to both help the kids with enrichment and life skills development, but also so the parents, if they're trying to work, have some activities that their students can be doing while they're trying to get all their work completed.
To access this, do people just go to your Winning Futures website?
Yes, they just have to go to winningfutures.org, and right on the main page, you'll see an icon that you can click on for at-home activities. And one of the things we've done is we make sure that these are relevant for teenagers. Often there's so many fun things you can do with younger students, but for our high school students and our middle school students, they sometimes need something a little different. So we're opening this up to the community as a whole for their young people to be able to go in and use the same curriculum.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that in terms of opening it up to the entire community, because there are many mentoring organizations, and each one of them have sort of their specialties. Some mentor to males, some to females, different age groups. I think about your organization, which was established, I think, back in 1994. You were mentored, which got you involved in this, and then you have taken it over and taken that expertise that you learned from the person that mentored you. But I think about Dave Bing's organization and Otis Bellinger's organization. There's so many of them. But the key question is, these organizations have thrived on that one-on-one mentorship, having contact with that student. How do you do this in this virtual world that we're living in now? And are we running the risk of losing these students who desperately need these mentors?
Well, the wonderful thing right now is we do have technology as an option. If this happened 10 years ago, there would be very limited things that we can do. So for us right now, what we're doing to make sure that we still stay engaged with our students, every single week, we are doing Zoom chat times with our mentors and with our students. And then the mentors are on every single week and continuously. It's not just like on Tuesday, they're going to contact their mentee, but they're staying in contact with their mentee through text, through phone calls, through video chats. Our mentors are even having their students teach them how to use some of this technology so that they can be better prepared at their jobs for the new things that they're going to have to reach. I just want to make sure people don't forget that we still have to focus on keeping our kids safe and healthy and moving forward into the future so that they don't have a massive gap when they go back to school in the fall,
right.
And that they're prepared to go back to school, and that programs like ours and Dave Bing's are still out there working tirelessly to make sure that young people are ready and that they're feeling like they can keep moving forward in their life no matter what's happening in their schools.
Chris Marshall, thanks so much for joining us, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Chuck. We appreciate it.
And coming up, we'll talk to Doug North. He is the chairman of the 2020 North American International Auto Show, which was canceled, but he also is going to be in that position for 2021. We'll be right back. Stay with us. That was a tough decision that you had to make. You released the information a week or so ago. How do you make good out of what has become a financial and promotional setback?
Well, there was an awful lot of preparation that went in, not just in the past year to 18 months, as you know, but actually dating back to several years prior when we were considering the change going from January to June. And so we had taken a great deal of notes, if you will, and we were following trends and talking to industry insiders, OEMs, consumers about making the change. And so we were prepared for the 18 months between our last show and what was going to be this next show in June. And it was, as you know, the last month has been kind of minute to minute with everything. And so we recognize that this cancellation is something that was necessary and it was the right thing to do. Some of the things that might have been on the periphery that we had hoped to maybe do, now we have an opportunity to reconsider those and maybe pull those into the show for next year. So
a key component of the auto show was the charity preview, the money that you raise and give to very needy charities. Will that have to wait a complete whole year, or is there something that you might be able to do this year? Because I've heard talk that you're thinking about doing something so that you can raise some of those funds to give to some of those organizations.
well, thank you for asking about that, because that is one of the fundamental components of our show and our responsibility to the city and to the larger Southeast Michigan community. And yes, it's a very big challenge. It already was a challenge for them because we went 18 months. It will be 18 months to come this June. So we've already begun conversations to try and develop some type of event. Maybe late this year would be our hope if we can do that, and certainly give people the opportunity to recognize what we're trying to do and hopefully support some interim event that would allow us to raise some money and at the same time continue to build for a year from this June so that the charity event we have next year would be the biggest we've ever had. And also the people that may have already bought tickets for this year have the option of donating those dollars to the charity that they've identified, or we will refund them as well. But it gives us an opportunity to try and develop and pull forward some dollars to benefit those very important foundations and charities that we really support.
Can this auto industry survive and thrive coming out of this virus?
Oh, I absolutely think it can. As we've seen in the past, certainly auto dealers and to a certain extent the manufacturers are very resilient. And, you know, we have people, dealers, fellow dealers that are in every day. I've been in the office most every day, even though we're closed. We anticipate at our store potentially reopening on a very limited basis for service because we do have customers that need service repairs. They need certain things done that they can't wait on, as well as emergency sales. There are people that get in accidents and things like that. So we're a resilient group. The OEMs, as you know, they're making ventilators and all sorts of other medical equipment right now. But I think that the economy was really strong. People do have underlying confidence. They're just worried like they should be now. But I think it'll bounce back, and I think we're going to see really a great show next year and a great amount of economic growth once we kind of get past the difficult part of this pandemic. But I'm very optimistic.
Thanks to all of my guests today. We'll be back next week in our regular 10 a.m. time period with more newsmakers in the spotlight. I'm Chuck Stokes, and please stay safe.